I'm opening. We have an eye, sort of a nostril, 2 teeth. One of the teeth has a small cavity. Close call, folks, but I think we got here just in time.
Presented by Maria Menounos and Kevin Undergaro. This is Anatomy of a Movie. In-depth discussions and breakdowns of various movie titles. And now that you've seen the movie, let the dissection begin.
You men who long for love, you mustn't all despair. There's a secret you should know to capture the hearts of the fair. You may not have the looks.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Anatomy of a Movie. Unfortunately, if you're watching, we do not have mustaches.
No, you get the closest, but no.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are doing A Million Ways to Die in the West by Seth MacFarlane today, and you know what? Funny story. We actually weren't going to do it because there were some mixed feelings on the panel of Anatomy about doing it, and as you guys know, we only do movies that we 100% love, but ironically, Demetri saw it, and I saw it, and we both loved it.
Yeah, go figure.
So, with very little research, unfortunately, Demetri's got some research.
I think so.
He'll make up for me.
Talk about. Yeah.
He'll make up for me because I certainly don't, except from having watched the movie because, again, we weren't really expecting it. But then as we were taping Maleficent, Demetri and I were talking beforehand and said, we should do this movie.
Yeah.
And so we're doing the movie.
Yeah, and hey, movie fans. Yeah, first I'm going to thank the critics for this one. This movie got eviscerated. And I have to say, I was really looking forward to seeing this movie from the trailers and the marketing. It got me hooked. I liked Seth MacFarlane, and I wanted to get a really funny movie. And then the reviews started filtering through. And good God, I mean, at a 33% on Rotten Tomatoes, they were horrible. And they pretty much all said the same thing. Too long. All the best parts are in the trailer. Seth MacFarlane's not funny. It just, it depressed me. I was like, I hate it when I look forward to seeing a movie and then that thing sort of happens. And I went and saw it anyways. And I walked out going, that movie was funny. I laughed.
I did.
I laughed a hell of a lot more than the critics would have led me to believe I was going to laugh. The movie is by no means perfect. It does run long.
It does.
Right? Some of the gags don't work. But all in all, I think more of it made me laugh than didn't make me laugh.
Yeah. And
there was even a beauty to it. The way that it was filmed. A much better film than the critics. The critics.
What have you believe?
Yeah, absolutely.
And before we fully dive into it, this podcast brought to you by the Every Girl's Guide to Diet and Fitness, of course, written by Maria Menounos, who helped start this entire network for us of Anatomy of a Movie. Without her, we would not be here talking about movies with you guys as fans.
And looking at me, I could use a guide to diet and fitness. I don't know if I fit into the category, but
there's definitely recipes in here.
In there. Yep.
There's a lot of great recipes in here, and so and there's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, I just know that I'll never look like that cover.
Well, we can. If you only had a mustache. If you only had a mustache. I really enjoyed this movie. A lot of people were. There's a lot of feedback that I heard from immediate people that I knew. Don't go see it. It's terrible, but I did anyway, and I laughed. I laughed, and you know what? For me, I love the crude humor behind it. So, when it got to those points.
Yeah, one scene in particular for me, the hat scene. When Charlize Theron spikes Neil Patrick Harris's drink, and then he's got to go to the shootout. That scene. That was very funny, very crude, but it played. I thought it played
well. I mean,
it played well.
The crudeness was okay, but just really quickly on that scene, it was. I think the funny was more of him trying to reach the second
hat, yeah, and the guy kept on slapping him away.
Yeah,
yeah. And here's the thing too. I'll straight up. I actually thought, following Ted, I thought this movie was going to be cruder than it was. I didn't find that this movie relied on its crudeness, even though there was stuff there. I wouldn't, like, if I were to compare it to Ted, I would say this was a less crude movie. I mean, do you agree, disagree?
I would agree, and I don't know if you could get it down to a PG-13, but there's definitely parts that, you know, if we're talking about unnecessary things, I don't think you need the sheep penis part at all. I don't think, you know, again, as I mentioned, the gag with the with him just having the runs works without seeing the run.
Right.
And I'm sure there's other stuff that I can think of as time goes by. Again, would that make it a PG-13 movie? I don't necessarily think so.
Right.
But nonetheless, I don't, you know, it would have certainly cut it down a little bit without taking away the humor.
No, absolutely. And if they were going to make this PG-13, I think they would have had to cut out the Giovanni Ribisi, Sarah Silverman characters, because most of theirs relied on crude humor without it being gross out crude, but it was crude humor. And the setup was, and this is what I love, the setup to that was, they're a couple about to be married, but they've been together for years and years, and they've yet to sleep together. They've yet to have sex, and she's a hooker. And she sleeps with everybody else but her boyfriend, who she clearly loves. And there's a great scene where they're in the saloon, and they're talking, and this character walks up from behind, he's like, fuck me, whore. And she goes, I gotta go to work. Yeah. And then, like, how come you're not sleeping? Oh, we're Christians. Of course. I mean, that running gag to me was very fun. I love that stuff. And tell me, I mean, I thought it was very dialogue driven, in a sense, where the humor comes, from the way a line is delivered, there were gags, there were physical gags, but to me, it was all about Seth MacFarlane's delivery. I loved his monologue about the million ways to die in the West. Yeah. And I
mean, it was, in that regard, it was a perfect marriage of camera work, dialogue, and delivery.
Absolutely.
It really was. I want to talk about how kind of, this whole thing came to be. From my point of view, a lot of people are saying that Seth MacFarlane, he's not the greatest actor-wise. You could cast him, you could recast him and have it be equally as funny. To me, I think this is his big, like, F you to Hollywood, or just revenge, just in general. Demetri's got his iPad. If you check out an old photo of him in high school, he's got glasses, he's got braces. When he says in the movie that he was a nerd asshole,
right?
He was a nerd asshole.
He was, absolutely.
And so even though he's shouldn't be a leading man, this was his, like, I think, just kind of whatever you want to call it. It's his revenge, it's his whatever. But he's, that's why he's on the big screen doing what he's doing.
And he was asked in an interview about, you're taking on, you've never really acted before. And his response to that, he goes, well, that's not true. He goes, I was in an episode of Gilmore Girls and Star Trek Enterprise. Mm. And he goes, that's my acting ability. Why he chose to do this is, for him, he just considers it a challenge. Like, I'd never done it. And this seemed like, I was at the genesis of this project, which, by the way, it was inspired while making Ted, where he was sitting down during a break with the other two writers, and they were watching Clint Eastwood's classic Hang 'em High. And while they were watching it they were going, geez, the West is a depressing place. It really is. He goes, there's either nothing to do, or you're fearing what is going to kill you. So you're either fear of being bored to death, or what out in nature. And they started riffing on the things in the West that could kill you, and hence A Million Ways to Die in the West. So when it comes time for him to decide, hey, I want to act, he's just like, well, it was a challenge for me. He goes, I wanted to do it. It seemed like a fun thing to do. I learned a lot. And then, when you put me up, he goes, one of the things he learned, he goes, I know this is acting 101. He goes, but you really fully understand it. Like, you get a lot from your co-stars, and you work off that. And he goes, and I was lucky. He goes, I'm working with one of the best actresses in the world, as Charlize Theron was. Yeah. So,
well, not just, he worked with
Neeson,
Neil Patrick Harris,
Giovanni Ribisi,
Sarah Silverman, everybody.
The principal from Saved by the Bell.
Dennis Haskins.
Dennis Haskins. And, you know,
one can argue Jamie Foxx.
that's true. And Doc
Christopher
Brown,
Lloyd.
Christopher Lloyd. And Ewan McGregor. Did you know that Ewan McGregor had a cameo? He was in The Fair. I missed him completely, but he is clearly in the movie.
And is it Ryan Reynolds that gets shot?
I don't. He's in The Fair, and I'm like, how did I miss Ewan McGregor? And apparently they got him because he was filming a movie like up the street from where they were in New Mexico. And apparently he had come by to say hi, and Charlize Theron was like, "Hey, you want to be in her movie?"
Maybe was it when they were talking about the dollar bill? Was it part of that scene? Because they had the crowd, and there was.
It could have been.
That again, just even that. I've never. Boy, that's a dollar.
$1 bill.
Take your hat off.
Yeah, $5 to the dollar. Yeah, I mean, that scene was great. So, but the cameos were fun. The ones that I recognized, I actually sort of want to see it to pick out Ewan McGregor.
Yeah.
But the mere fact he just did it as a favor and he was just filming up the street, I think is great. So, look, I had a conversation with somebody about this movie who also saw it and also liked it better than he thought he would. And we talked about Seth MacFarlane's performance, and he made a great analogy. He goes, I sort of liken it to watching those first few seasons of Seinfeld. Jerry Seinfeld is not a good actor. He goes, but you watched him anyways because there was something about him that was funny.
Yeah.
And I sort of I was like, well, that's a great analogy because Seth MacFarlane may not be a great actor, but as a character, I find him funny. There's charm, there's a charisma about him where he can deliver a line of dialogue, and I just think he's funny the way he delivers it.
Yeah, I mean, the only times he really, and I don't think it's necessarily fails either, but where he's not as strong is when he is supposed to get a little bit more tender and emotional.
Sure.
Particularly in that scene before he walks her back to the hotel and they have their kiss.
Sure.
That would have been the only scene for me that's like, okay, I can see where your strengths aren't really, they might be slightly hindering the movie, but apart from that's a real big nitpick. 'Cause trust me, I've seen some worse actors and worse roles.
And the other thing too, and maybe this was off-putting to critics, is that at its core, it's a period piece. Takes place in the 1800s. It's a Western, yet our characters' sensibilities are totally modern. Yeah. Like there wasn't anything that they did. I mean, I was even watching like the costumes looked too clean to be in a Western. Like this definitely wasn't an Unforgiven kind of thing. So it was a period piece, but set with modern day like sensibility and or dialogue and humor for that matter.
Well, that's everything tied. I mean, it is as much as a period piece. Ultimately, it's a satire. Just even the wheel with the stick.
The wheel with the stick to me was a great gag, because number one, it just goes back. Kids with the wheel and the stick, and Giovanni Ribisi and Seth MacFarlane, Albert, they're walking down and going.
Of course, there's a study about it.
Of course. There's a study, yeah, and I read that those kids are paying too much damn attention to those wheels. They're losing all their attention, and they're not staying focused the way they should be. And I'm like, that's funny. It's because that relates to what people are said about TV, what they said about the internet, what they say about Twitter, and here we are. It's just the wheel and the stick, and to me that was a very funny, keen Seth MacFarlane insight humor.
Yeah, and although that didn't come back multiple times, what I thought worked really well was the photograph. Yeah, because not only you're tying it back to his girlfriend that he's trying to win back, but now you're also tying it back to Charlize Theron's character, and it's just throughout a running joke of like, why would you smile?
Why would you smile? Why would you smile at a photograph? And what really is funny about that too is you pay attention to the period pieces, Westerns. If there are photographs, people are not smiling at all. And I just thought that maybe we should go up there and smile. What?
Yeah.
and it was a nice running gag, just like the Christian joke was. Oh, we're Christians. We're not going to sleep. I thought that those jokes worked. I agree with you 100%. Some of the gross out humor, like the sheep the sheep dick and the urinating on. Like I was like, had they cut that out, it almost seemed like it belonged in another movie, because this movie, in all honesty, to me, didn't necessarily rely on those kinds of gags, because there weren't enough of them. There weren't enough of those Ted moments. To me, the movie relied on character comedy. It relied on dialogue comedy. Just listening to the Mustache song, you know, and that harkened to me. I'm going to say a movie here, and I'm not comparing it, because if you're going in, you saw the marketing like I did, and if you're thinking you're going to get Blazing Saddles, you're not getting Blazing Saddles. Just get that out of your head. However, there are wisps of Blazing Saddles, like the Mustache song. Mel Brooks was fantastic at crafting a song and writing lyrics to it. He did it in Blazing Saddles. Madeline Kahn played, she performed a brilliant scene. The Mustache song is very much like that, and it's a very funny song. Yeah. And one of the highlights of the movie is like the whole dance, the whole choreography was great. And Neil Patrick Harris, again, nobody's saying, they're just saying they're saying it's such a bad movie, but I thought he was very funny.
Yeah, and
right?
and again, that became a motif of like, I can't get that song out of my
head.
And because as an audience, you're thinking like, you're kind of thinking the same thing. So it was great for the character. It was great in terms of timing in the movie, because it just goes through all those layers, because you're like, yeah, I can't get that out of my head.
It's like listening. Yeah, it's like you hear an NSYNC song in an elevator, and you walk out, and it's like, for the rest of the day, I can't get that stupid song in my head.
Luckily, we have more than 3 songs, though, that we can turn to, which I thought was pretty funny as well.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed Neil Patrick Harris, who did a really good, his turn as the villain, so to speak, or as a villain.
Yeah, because he has to be, until we get Liam Neeson back.
Right.
There's no one for him to really quarrel with.
Yeah.
Except for him.
And again, we always talk about how we like movies where actors seem to relish their roles. He seemed to relish his role as the mustachioed man who set up shop for the it was the art of shaving back in the 1800s.
I know.
That's what his place was.
It was, talk about, they had the whole raunchiness and things like that. And just when they're alone together right before he kind of gets the runs.
Right.
Yeah, and just seeing his fantasy of what really gets him off, and it's just having his mustache. I have stature. I'm an important man.
I have a mustache.
And it was that was to me a raunchy moment that made sense, and it worked because it was just so damn funny.
Yeah, it really was. Man, and again, talking about this movie, I just appreciate it a little bit more. We could talk about stuff like that didn't work, and there were things that didn't work, but ultimately,
I mean, Christopher Lloyd, like people are saying, the Back to the Future bit.
Yeah.
I mean, how much is it going to cut out of the movie? Ultimately,
30 seconds.
Not a lot, but when you kind of add that up across the board, you'd be all right.
For 2 seconds, I thought it was cool. And when it was done, I was like, okay, that didn't really do anything to the movie for me. Had they cut it out, I wouldn't have known the wiser, and I wouldn't have missed it.
Yeah.
Had I found out about it maybe later, I would have been, that would have been cool to see, and then I'd see it maybe on Blu-ray. But yeah, I mean, like we said, some of the gross out humor, again, because the movie didn't necessarily play that way through and through, they could have trimmed it. I mean, we talked just before sitting down. It does suffer from we need to be a 2-hour comedy, where this movie could have clearly been 100 minutes.
Yeah, it could have been. But at the same time, I do respect them for just going for it, especially as much as I love Dennis Haskins, that's a part for me that you could have cut out. Both scenes of that. However, the runaway slave bit, it allowed them freedom to just go there. And when it came on, it was like, oh my God.
Yeah, right. And I'm going to say something. I'm not a racist. But the runaway slave gag, the shooting gallery, that was a moment of boldness that we have not seen in movies since perhaps maybe Blazing Saddles. And I give him props for at least attempting. I don't think Seth MacFarlane is a racist. I knew exactly what he was going for in that. There was,
I think it plays
shock
correct.
humor.
I think it plays correct because his character says, "Well, I think that's a little unnecessary."
Right. And we get, especially after coming off of 12 Years a Slave, okay, we get that. I am not making fun of slavery. However, I found it to be very bold. We're so sensitive. Yeah. And, today about the boundaries that we push in movies are, throwing dildos in people's faces. And that's about the envelope that we have. If you throw in a racist humor thing, people get shocked and, oh, how could you do that? But, this was something that was being done a lot by Mel Brooks. Yes, he did it. He would handle it much better. But this one scene, I give him credit for being bold.
But it's also beyond that because, if I was to really defend, if I was to channel him or anybody, I'm not necessarily speaking for them, but I think I have an understanding of this. You could see where it wouldn't be so beyond the West to actually do this because that's how we were that racist in that time period. So you know what? You could say, hey, I'm just commenting about the time, and it's not beyond that.
Absolutely.
And just like with the Indians of like, God, we're so fair to the Indians, and like, why do they have to be such assholes? Yes, it's funny, but you could also argue the same thing of like, that's how we thought.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing, what's very interesting about the shooting gallery is, and again with an interview, the shooting gallery is in a sense what partially led to Jamie Foxx's cameo appearance, showing up as his costume as Django. They didn't say the name, but he's costumed pretty much just like him. And as Seth MacFarlane, like they had actually filmed. They had another ending to the movie, and that was Amanda Seyfried and Neil Patrick Harris. Neil Patrick Harris's character was so shamed he had to get out of town, and he had to go to a place where nobody knew him, and that was Mexico. So as they're crossing over the Mexico border, there are some, people native to Mexico. Can I say Mexicans without getting Latin Americans? And they see these people coming through, and they go, "What assholes?" He goes, "God, we got to build a wall to keep these people out of here," which is a funny joke. Yeah. And personally, I would have liked that ending, but Seth MacFarlane cops to when they were test screening the movie, the shooting gallery gag really off-put a lot of people. They were so sensitive. So he puts the Django character in there to sort of buy it back. Yeah, in a sense. But then again, if you stay to the very, very end of the movies, Django throws a nod to Blazing Saddles, or as he's walking, he goes, "Where are the white women at?" So, that's sort of funny. It's a nod. Personally, I like the original ending a little bit better.
I'd have to see it. I mean, yeah. I know the Django Unchained was funny to me. From what you're saying, that one seems funny to me. Yeah. Could they have both worked somehow? I don't know without feeling already, because we're already at that point slightly too long, but we'll see.
Yeah, to me, like the Django, knowing that there was, and I didn't find out until after I was doing research, and but yeah, the thing is that it ties into the shooting gallery, and again, their test screenings showed that joke. It was a question of, was he going to take the joke out, which he almost did, or what do I do to fix it and make audiences maybe accept it more? Oh,
yeah, because you have to reshoot that, because that's a pivotal scene.
It is. Absolutely. And again, I just applaud him for the boldness of putting that in there. And please don't mistake me for a racist because I say it's bold, but if you throw yourself back into the 70s, if you're watching a Mel Brooks movie, if you're watching Blazing Saddles or History of the World, or To Be or Not to Be from Mel Brooks, I mean, he always has that humor in there, and at the time it was very shocking. You watch Blazing Saddles today, number one, it would never be made, period. So that's why props to Seth MacFarlane in keeping that and getting that in there, because it's a funny gag.
So, one of the things I do want to talk about, let's talk about Liam Neeson specifically, because he not. I don't think it's his ass when he gets the daisy in it, but nonetheless, he's portraying this character, and so that's especially where we talked about him being such an action star, the way he's going, and then to be in this type of movie and just embrace it. Mm-hmm. I thought that was bold in itself.
I think it was bold for Liam Neeson. Apparently, he was blushing while reading the script. And, he had not done a movie of this sort before.
I don't think there is a movie of this sort before.
No, that's true. Yeah, and for him, it's a departure. We always talk about when Liam Neeson kicks ass, he's great. And to see him in this movie, and he's like the villain, and he's got the one scene with the daisy getting put in his ass, that's probably his most, outside of that, his character plays it pretty straight as a bad guy. Like he's not Harvey Korman, he's not a foil, he's a bad guy.
Yeah.
And he said because he gets to play it straight as such,
it worked for him.
It worked.
Yeah, and the comedy really does come around the people that he's kind of with.
Right.
I mean, that ending when Seth MacFarlane is explaining it, like, he's dead. He didn't hear any of that. How smart I was. Right. And it's great because obviously you as the audience are like wondering what happened. So it explains it and it has that little button. So it just has everything so perfect.
And again, to me, it's Seth MacFarlane humor through dialogue, which is funny in the situation. And I mean, when you get a Liam Neeson, that adds credibility to your movie. But outside of getting a daisy plucked in his ass, like, he wasn't funny per se. I mean, I can't point to a scene, but let's, I'm going to say, I'll also look at Charlize Theron, who hasn't really done this type of a broad comedy that I can think of. Academy Award-winning actress. I think the most beautiful woman I can watch. I love Charlize Theron, and even in the getup she had, she looked attractive. She was
the getup
awesome.
that makes black men
just go crazy with their hat. Just I can't believe they accentuate that. She looked great, whatever she was wearing, and she was somebody that I truly thought was having a good time making this movie. How many times was she? And I thought their chemistry was good. I thought their banter back and forth. I got the sense that every time that they were together and Seth MacFarlane said something that was funny, like, her laughter wasn't necessarily acting. I actually think she was cracking up and I think she was trying to hold it back because she was going to either flub her lines. I found it to be true laughter. Yeah. And she was really, and she held her own against him.
And to the comedy, it just, and that's part of the whole thing. They just keep going. All these lines just keep going. And, sometimes as an audience member, you don't necessarily have to catch all of it. But there's some, for me, when he's talking about, she's like, where's your parents? Oh, dad's up on the hill burying himself next to mom. And he just keeps going. I'm like, wait a minute. That's actually really funny.
It's a movie of you have to pay attention.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe the critics weren't paying attention. Maybe it's not their cup of tea.
It's definitely
I get
not
it.
their cup of tea.
But you have to pay attention to what is being said because, sometimes in joke telling, the best part of a joke is the way that it's said and what is said. And Seth MacFarlane has that pattern down. And again, I like the scene with Seth and Charlize. And he's like going, oh, I'm going to shoot a load into your cans. Yeah. And she starts laughing. Now, that's in the trailer, but what's not in the trailer is her laughing. She just goes, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
And I like that's funny to me. Call me crazy, but I when their chemistry works, just like Sarah Silverman and Giovanni Ribisi. When Giovanni Ribisi was like twerking at the bar, like, where does that come from? And he was very funny doing it.
And I think he had his little straws.
He's like sipping, he's sipping like a girl out of his little. He was funny, and I'm like, how can I not be laughing at this? Why? I really thought I wasn't going to be laughing at all, and I'm laughing a hell of a lot more than I thought I was going to. So,
And I mean, again, if you really peel away the layers, you can find the humor, to me, in a lot of it. If you want to take it at face value, that's great. But you have Bill Maher, who's, if you think about it, he's being paid to come on to be funny,
Right.
and which is exactly what he's kind of doing as a character in the movie, because they have this script for him.
Right.
And so it's almost commenting on just how people just hire people just to come in and do the funny bit, leave.
Meta humor. Yeah. I love his line when he's leaving. This crowd sucks.
Yeah.
And he walks off stage. Yeah, and that was, to me that was a funny cameo. That was a cameo that worked. So yeah, I mean, going into this movie, the other thing too that I didn't expect was its cinematography.
Yeah, it was absolutely beautiful.
Was it? I mean, it was beautiful. They filmed this movie in New Mexico. And one of the things that Seth MacFarlane said, in New Mexico, not a whole hell of a lot to do. It was literally like A Million Ways to Die in the West. But they said the one thing that could kill you was the weather. Because there was a time, he goes, we were wrapping for the day, everybody's going home. I think Charlize Theron had told this story about. Then all of a sudden it started pouring. They had flash floods there. Yeah. And Seth MacFarlane's like calling him, go get the hell out of there. And he described it, he likened it to, and again, this is why I like Seth MacFarlane, he likened it to the scene where Wayne Knight is Nedry in Jurassic Park. Mm-hmm. He gets lost in that storm before the Jalop. He goes, yeah, I felt like Wayne Knight is Nedry. He goes, it's pouring down, I'm going to get swashed away. He goes, yeah, the weather out here in New Mexico can kill you. But it lent itself to it. That's the other thing about this movie. It looked like a Western. Much like, and again, I'll make this comparison, and you can, shoo me all you want. When Mel Brooks shot Blazing Saddles, he wanted it in scope. He wanted it to have that Western Technicolor feel. Similar here. And Michael Barrett, who's the cinematographer, I mean, they made it look beautiful. The colors, and in digital, the theater I saw it at, it just looked gorgeous. Yeah. I think it was Monument Valley that it was filmed in.
And there was some great night scenes, some obviously great day scenes.
Yeah.
But they did a whole number. And then the town, the town looked great because you always had that little windmill that they always cut back to, right. and it was interesting how they used the stump for the showdowns. Yeah. Because the guy it just depended who came in which way, right. And depending on who was going to win or lose.
Right.
I don't quite know the formula yet, but again, they kind of switched it up every time, I believe.
Yeah, and again, even the way the shootouts were filmed, or it had a very Western feel to it. And I know Seth MacFarlane, being that he loves Westerns, he wanted this to have a John Ford kind of look. In fact, one scene, character is coming out through a door. He said, I totally ripped that off from The Searchers. I wanted it to look panoramic and look at the sky and your character is here. And, I think he really accomplished that. He made it look and even sound like a Western. The music, I thought, the score was very, I thought, great, epic Western feel to it. And Eric McNeely, I believe, was the composer, and he and Seth MacFarlane are really big score people. They love scores. They were inspired by Elmer Bernstein, who had done a lot of Westerns in his time, and he said that's the way I want it to sound. I want it to sound really big, and I want it to sound like a Western.
Certainly the horse chase scenes and things of that nature, I mean, those were...
Joel McNeely, I apologize. Joel McNeely was the composer, and the music, outside of Mustache Man, the music was very epic Westernish, and he shot it. It was weird. He shot it realistically. He shot it like a Western. So the comedy has to come from the comedy's definitely coming from the characters, for sure. Yeah. So, he took his filming very seriously, I thought, and he really painted a beautiful, in cinema, in scope, this picture looked great.
Well, that's, what's great about it, if you shoot it in that way, you're making the point that what has to stand out and be different is the acting and the comedy.
Right.
So if it looks the same as a Western, if it has the same type of music, then yes, you are now, now you're not bottlenecked to that point,
Right.
and all you see is that.
Right.
So because you're already familiar with the other parts.
True. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and when you look at it, he had Seth MacFarlane had a funny thing to say. His favorite Western, which coincidentally is my favorite Western, one of my favorite movies, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, James Stewart, John Wayne. Great movie. And he goes on, he's like, probably my favorite Western. Oddly, if there's a dramatic Western I can point to that bears any similarity at all of this movie, it would probably be that one, because Jimmy Stewart spends the whole movie going, what the fuck is wrong with all of you? You're all a bunch of savages. And that's what Seth MacFarlane's point is, in a million ways. Anything that is not you is out to kill you. Even the doctor's out to kill you.
The ironic part for me was I was like, this is such a much simpler, better time. So.
But could you imagine if you got... I mean, it's funny, though. Could you imagine if, say you got shot in the arm, like how they would treat that? What, they were going to take a robber and a bluebird and have suck out the bullet? That was funny.
That was.
Yeah.
And it came back because obviously later he's getting the work done at the doctor. And you know what? I give him a lot of credit. Story-wise, they had a great kind of timeline, and
Sure.
They had all the elements where, quote-unquote, her brother is put in jail. So that at least kind of, for now, it gives us leeway that they can hang out freely until, of course, he gets out, and then everything goes south.
Right.
The 1 week deadline.
Yep.
Everything played well in terms of story elements.
Yeah, he structured it outside of the fact that, it's sort of apatowed, went a little bit long. But, the other thing, too, that's key to me in this movie is that the relationship works. Not that it's a grand romantic movie. I'm not calling this a romantic comedy by any means.
But it also it worked because they made light of the fact of, like, why do you even like her? And, so many times, like, you would see perhaps, I'm not the biggest, like, romantic comedy guy, but where he would actually ultimately win her back and whatever else. But I'm like, yeah, she's kind of a piece of shit.
Yeah, you were talking about Amanda Seyfried's character, right? Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Who
absolutely.
The big eyes.
The big
they're practically Chinese.
That was really funny. And then when he's having his hallucination, that was very funny too. But I bought Charlize Theron and Seth MacFarlane.
Yeah.
I bought the relationship in the movie for how it was portrayed. And I wanted them
she
together.
She gave it a lot of credit, especially to, in that scene when she said, I do hate the West for my own reasons, but I do hate the West. And then they had that fun moment of like, isn't it great when you can hate something mutually rather than loving something?
Right.
Hate can move mountains.
It can move. It can. And Charlize Theron, speaking of, she's been asked, like, why did you audition for this role? How did you pick her? And Charlize Theron candidly comes out and goes, no, I picked this. She goes, I wanted to be in this movie. So she campaigned to try to get into this movie. She read the script. She thought it was hysterical. Obviously, she had to be a Seth MacFarlane fan. And she campaigns to be in this movie. And, again, I think she had as much fun filming this as perhaps, he did. And look, Seth MacFarlane, he's a busy guy. He does a lot of things. And I don't know, I think he's becoming more accomplished as a director. And listen, if he decides to act, hopefully he doesn't take it too much to heart about his acting ability. I wouldn't mind seeing him in another movie again. And I think he's funny, and I think he's got talent as far as being a director and on both sides of the camera. And he's a good writer.
He is. Well, shoot, what was I going to say? I forget at this point. I was going to say this, and just even knowing how humor can be used with just different language, right? I don't know. The Indian language itself, obviously, it was just written to be written. And I say that because and he just goes Mila Kunis, which means fine. And just even knowing that would be funny in itself.
Which is actually, I guess the Mila Kunis is a Seth MacFarlane Easter egg.
Of course. Well, yeah,
and stuff, and outside of Ted and what was I gonna call the animated show?
Family Guy.
Yeah. I swear to God, I thought, and I haven't found anything to corroborate it. It sounded like they were speaking in Klingon, which wouldn't be above Seth MacFarlane to do, because that would seem to be his. I mean, but that scene I thought was very funny, as well. Yeah. His hallucination did have a Star Trek reference because Patrick Stewart played the flying sheep.
Mm-hmm. So it did sound familiar.
Yeah. So I also liked how he picked being a sheep farmer. Because according to Seth MacFarlane, sheep farmers were the most hated farmers because the sheep would eat just enough down to like ruin the grass or something to that effect. So his character Albert comes from a line of sheep farmers and
97 generations.
And his parents were. I thought his father was hysterical too. The thing with the tooth fairy.
Yeah. That was the portions of that were slightly unnecessary, but I still found it funny.
Mm-hmm.
Abraham Lincoln.
Oh,
what?
Gilbert Gottfried as Abraham Lincoln. that killed me. I thought that.
I mean, it was great because it was the continuation of the motif of like, okay, how to be a rich man.
Right.
I was poor just like you.
I was poor. It was just. I was like, oh my God, that's Gilbert Gottfried as Abraham Lincoln. Like that to me is just a stroke of genius.
Yeah.
Too. It's either your cup of tea or it's not, and I don't know. I found it to be very funny.
I did too. I really did.
Now, one thing that's also been talked about this movie that I think it needs addressing too. One of the things that was echoed through many of the reviews were the funniest parts are in the trailer. Now, I would argue that yes, to an extent they were, but if you see
Gilbert Gottfried wasn't.
Gilbert Gottfried wasn't. A lot of the cameos and
the mustache song wasn't.
No, absolutely. And scenes ran longer than what they showed you in the trailer. However, just recently, Neighbors has been criticized of the funniest parts, like the airbag scene shown in the trailer. This movie, they said the funniest parts are the trailers. What's in the trailer? Just this past week, for those who listen to Howard Stern, Jonah Hill was on, and he was asked, because he has 22 Jump Street coming up, he was asked, like, do you feel that they show that when they're marketing the movie, they put in too much of the funny stuff that's in the movie? And I mean, I think it's a good question because I think that I come from the world of trailers. When I was at Lionsgate, my responsibility was getting the trailers up, at movie theaters across this fine country of ours. And, we would always be having the battle with marketing to say, cut the trailer down. It's too long. A, for our playability's sake, and B, maybe you're telling too much of the movie. And I think we all have had experiences where we've seen a trailer that has given away way too much of a movie. And in a comedy especially, you don't want to give away your best jokes because then what's the fun in... You're already primed when you're waiting for what you saw in the trailer and you're hoping that there's more. And in some cases there isn't. So what are your thoughts? Like, did you think that the funniest parts are in the trailer?
Obviously, Don't Kill Us, It's Sex Night. I knew that one was going to be in it, so I kind of was waiting for that one.
I'll put the Bible away.
Yeah, The Ice, that went south fast. I knew that was coming up. So, but overall, it didn't, even though I knew certain parts were coming, it didn't hinder me. It didn't hinder the experience. Had it been a worse movie and those were the only funny bits, then yeah, it would have suffered a lot more.
Yeah.
But, I remember with 21 Jump Street, obviously I haven't seen 22 Jump Street yet, but with 21 Jump Street, yes, a lot of the funny stuff was in the trailer, but I remember seeing the movie and I was like, oh, that's a good movie.
Funny movie.
And so as long as your movie can hold up to the funny that's there, it can work. If your literally funny can be contained within 2 minutes and 30 seconds, it's not going to be a good movie.
No.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting because the other movie Neighbors, which has been accused of that, and this one, they're both Universal movies. I'm not knocking Universal marketing.
Comedy is a little bit tougher because
is.
how what do you want to sell? If you try to sell the story, people be like, "Oh, this movie's boring."
Yeah.
What the hell are you gonna do? Whereas, like, okay, if I'm let's say Inception or The Matrix or I don't know what just came out, Godzilla,
Right.
You can do it in a different way.
Sure.
You can highlight other parts because Godzilla was ironically sometimes funny.
Yeah.
But that's not the focus of it. More
No,
comedy. You're
have to show
selling
a
the
gag.
laughs.
Yeah.
And if you don't sell laughs, then it's like, well, this sucks. Why am I going to see that?
Yeah, but I agree with you. It's a fine line for those people who create trailers. I mean, it's got to be difficult because you don't want to give away your best gags, and sometimes you have to give away a really good joke to put it in the trailer, or that ends up being the button of that trailer, just to try to get your audience interested in it. But even in a non-comedy, like for example, and I think we talked about this last year when we talked about Ender's Game. Ender's Game pretty much sold the entire movie. It gave away the end if you were able to piece things together, and especially if you read the book. And I understand, if you read the book, you already know how the ending is, but that trailer gives everything away. And, trailers, don't have to be 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes long. They shouldn't showcase everything. They should give you a taste. And if it includes giving one really good joke, and you're right, Million Ways to Die in the West, it was actually the marketing that I was like, hey, this movie looks funny. I like Seth MacFarlane, And again, I'm very thankful that I didn't take the reviews too much to heart, albeit I was depressed when, it gets a 33%.
Yeah, you're like, what?
On Rotten Tomatoes, and you're like, oh my God, especially, I guess, because after the success of Ted, which is very funny, I was just expecting really good comedy. I ended up getting what I think is a really good comedy, but part of that is that the critics just raised the bar so low. John Comfort is not here, but we had a similar discussion when we talked about the movie Monuments Men, another movie that was getting panned by the critics. And when we saw it, we both walked out going, what movie did they see? And I enjoyed this movie a lot. And you must have had many experiences where you just don't agree with the critics at all.
Sometimes it just depends who writes a review first. And then, everyone more or less sometimes follows suits. You get what I'm saying? Because then it's like, well, I don't want to be the guy to say that it was funny when everybody else is saying it's terrible.
Yeah. And
so that can work against the movie. Again, that's why I just go see a movie unless it's really overwhelmingly bad from
Single
critics,
digits, yeah.
from fans. Then don't. But ultimately, I think any movie out there can have an audience, as long as it's the right audience.
Sure.
The audience may be 50 people, or it could be a worldwide hit like X-Men.
Under your skin, or something.
But there is not. I mean, there's Grand Budapest Hotel. Obviously not
good example.
But that movie is still playing in movie theaters.
Absolutely.
Still playing.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at the times, I'm like, this is another week we're in with this damn movie.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it.
Uh-huh.
I can't wait to buy the DVD.
Me too.
But at the same time, I'm like, why? This movie is still in the theater. Who is paying to see this movie? What? 90 days after it's been released?
Which is so rare. And there's another movie called Chef, which I think is having a longevity. The smaller movies. We can talk about distribution patterns maybe at another show. But, to your point earlier about audiences and movies. Now, this movie, like we said, got a 33% rating from Rotten Tomatoes. Neighbors was in the mid-70s. I think it was 73. I think it was like 73% on Neighbors. Now, here's what's interesting about both those movies is, obviously, critics, they gravitated to Neighbors more. However, the audience, now when you go by the Cinema Score rating, both movies got a B. Both of them. So you had one that was on the high end of the scale, one on the low end of the scale, but audiences still felt both movies. They gave it a B.
Yeah, and I give this one way more credit than Neighbors. I enjoyed Neighbors, but did it go above and beyond, what a comedy is to me? No.
Yeah,
This
I
just
agree.
went for it.
It did go for it, and again, I can appreciate it going for it, and I appreciate what Seth MacFarlane did, and like I said, I walked out. My friend and I go, the movie was funny. Like I laughed. Will it be the funniest movie of the year? I don't know. I'll have to see more comedies for that to happen. I enjoyed it more than I enjoyed Neighbors. I don't know. Will it be the funniest movie of the year? Probably not. Do I put it down in my top 10 of comedies? Probably not, but I still doesn't mean it hindered my enjoyment of this movie, and it doesn't mean that I'll probably get it on Blu-ray.
Yeah.
Just to hear Seth MacFarlane talk about it if he does a commentary, just to see that alternate ending, and maybe show it to some other people who may have missed it. And then maybe they'll watch it and think I am on
I think
crack.
it's definitely going to have great rewatchability.
I think so.
Yeah.
There's so much to watch. There's so much to listen to.
Yeah.
In that movie. So yeah, I think it's good stuff.
Well, speaking of walking out, we're going to walk out very shortly. Follow us on Movie Anatomy on Twitter. Demetri has been quite the fanatic of answering a lot of your fan comments. He will continue to do so. That is his mission statement.
It is. It really is. Well, because I think as a whole, I think we all appreciate the feedback.
Yeah.
Good or bad. And nobody has really been like too rude. And my whole thing is,
And I don't think. And then the nice part is, it's not even feedback. It's just more furthering discussion of what you guys are talking about. And I think that's great. That's what this is all about. We love movies. You love movies. We want to talk movies. That's
Absolutely. And I'm more than I love to talk about it. And and in one comment I even wrote, hey, maybe it makes me a better host. Keep on writing because maybe I learned from something that you said. And it's the one thing about movies. I think that's great. You and I talking about movies. Marissa, we could talk about movies. Maybe you picked up on something that I never saw. Yeah. And maybe you make me look at something in a different way. And hopefully maybe we can do that for you because that'll make my day if we can do that. So
there you go. Well, thank you guys for listening. Hope you guys had fun. We certainly did. I'm glad we did this movie. It almost got canned for us, but we brought it back from death, and you know what? Perhaps we should walk around with coffins as clothes. We'll see you here for the next dissection, which will be Edge of Tomorrow with composer Christoph Beck, and as well as The Fault in Our Stars.
Yeah.
So we'll see you here, and enjoy this mustache song.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the rest of the Anatomy of a Movie staff, we would like to thank you for listening and subscribing to the show. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email or tweet us. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been Anatomy of a Movie.
Thanks for watching Anatomy of a Movie on YouTube. For more on your favorite movies, subscribe to our channel here and be sure to let us know what you think in our comment section below here. Bye.